Yeah, is tonight's shir is being sponsored by B.J. Frankel. It's Benjamin Yitzchak ben Sora Leah in honor of Reb David Bogopolsky, who makes these shiurim available amongst many other things that he does on behalf of Yidden. And l'schus, his children, Meir Simcha Chaim ben Kela Nechama, Ariel Yehuda ben Kela Nechama, Ezra Yehoshua ben Kela Nechama, and Yehudis Liebe bas Kela Nechama, that they all should be zoiche to be dovuk in Torah and have an aliyah in Torah and Yerushalayim in good health and happiness. So we're about to celebrate Shavuos. You know that in Chumash Bamidbar and Parshas Pinchas, we have the korbanos of all the moyadim. And it says, Ubiyoim HaBikurim, which is Shavuos, V'hakrivchem mincha chadosha la'Hashem b'shvuoseichem, mikra kodesh yeh lachem, kol meleches avodah lo yisasu, v'ikravtem oila l'reach nichoyach la'Hashem, porim b'nei bokor shnayim, ayel echad, shiva kvosim b'nei shona, u'minchosam soilas b'lulav Hashem, and etc. So'ir echad lechaper aleichem, milvad oilas hatomit. So the Yerushalmi in Rosh Hashanah, Perek Daled Avachaches says, Rav Mishar Sheyeh b'shem Rav Idi, b'chol korbanos ksiv chet, u'ba'atzeres ein ksiv chet. Whenever the so'ir appears by any of the other regolim, it says that the so'ir is a chatos. Over here, it just said so'ir lechaper aleichem. It doesn't say se'ir chatos. So he says, Amar lohem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mikevon shekibaltem aleichem oil Torah, Mala ani aleichem ki'ilu lo yichotosem miyemeichem. That since Yidden on Shavuos are mekabel oil Torah, so they consider it as if they never sinned. Now, it's interesting because it doesn't say chatos, but it does say lechaper. It says so'ir echad lechaper aleichem. So if it's mala ani aleichem ki'ilu lo yichotosem miyemeichem, why does it say lechaper? So it must be because the lashon kapara doesn't necessarily mean kapara for a chet, because you know by the korban oilo it says in Parashas Vayikra v'nirtza loy lechaper olav, and you know the oilo comes for transgressing an asay. And you know that when one is over on an asay, so as soon as he does tshuva, eino izaz misham at shemoichlin lo. Now, one has to do tshuva before he brings the carbon, because if not, it's zevach rishoyim toyeva. So the carbon wouldn't qualify. So it must be that he did tshuva before he's bringing the carbon. So he has no chet anymore, because eino izaz misham on an asay at shemoichlin lo. So you see that the lashon kapara v'nirtza loy lechaper olav doesn't necessarily mean kapara for a chet, because the oil is considered a doiroin ba'alma. It's considered a gift. The Gemara says in Shavuos Daf Zayin, not in Shavuos, in Zvachim Daf Zayin. So you know in the Sefer Atanya, in the Igeres HaTshuva Perek Beis, he says about this, v'nirtza loy lechaper olav, the ein zu kaporas nafshoy, elo lechaper lefnei Hashem liyois nachas ruach lekoinoi. Whatever exactly that means, but lechaper doesn't have to be kaporas chet. And therefore, the Yerushalmi is saying that it says so'ir lechaper, but it doesn't say se'ir chatos by Shavuos. That's because kol ha'mekabel olav oil Torah is ki'ilu malani olav ki'ilu lechoto miyom. So this is about the pasuk in Parshas Pinchas. But if you look in Parshas Emor, it says, "Usfartem lochem mimochres haShabbos miyoyim aviachem asay ma'atnufa sheva Shabbos litzmimis tiyena ad mimochres haShabbos hashvius tisberu chamishim yoyim v'kraftem mincha chadosh LaHashem mi moishvoiseichem taviu lechem tnufa etc. V'kraftem al alechem shiva kvosim tzmimim b'nei shona ufar ben bokar echad ve'elim shnayim yu oilo Hashem v'asisem seir izim echad lechatos u'shnei kvasim leishona. So in Parshas Emor, the Torah refers to this l'chara same soir, the soir of Shavuos, as a soir that's a seir chatos. So how does the Yerushalmi make a drasha about the pasuk in Parshas Pinchas and say that it's malani aleichem ki'ilu lechatosam yemechem when we have another pasuk in Parshas Emor that tells us that the soir of Shavuos is lechaper? But you know, the Mishnah Menachos Daf Mem Hey Amid Beis says, Rabbi Akiva says about the Kivsei Atzeres. He says, Kol ha'omur b'chumash ha'pikudim karev b'midbar, that the karbonis that appear in Chumash ha'pikudim and Chumash b'midbar in Parashas Pinchas, those karbonis were brought already in the midbar. V'chol ha'omur b'toiras kohanim, the karbonis that appear in Parashas Emor and Chumash v'yikra loy karev b'midbar. Okay, so you see that the karbonis of Parshas Emor and the karbonis of Parshas Pinchas, both being karbonis for Shavuos, are not the same karbonis, and that in the midbar they brought only the karbonis that appear in Pinchas, and in the Mikdosh they brought also the karbonis that appear in Pinchas and also the karbonis that appear in Emor. And as it's explained in the Brisa, in Menachos, Rabbi Akiva Oime Yochol, you might think, Hein Kvasim ha'amurim kan, Hein Kvasim ha'amurim b'chumash ha'pikudim, you might think that the 7 kvasim that are mentioned in Parashas Emor are the same 7 kvasim that are mentioned in Parashas Pinchas. However, Amrit, Kisha'ato magia etzel porim ve'elim einon hein. When you get to the Purim Va'elim, you see that we're not talking about the same thing, because in Parashas Emor it says par and 2 Elim, whereas in Parashas Pinchas it says 2 Purim and 1 eye. So this is a different series of karbonis that was also brought on Shavuos, but these are 2 different sets of karbonis. Elo halolu bo'in biglal atzmon. The karbonis that appear in Parashas Pinchas are the karbonis haboin biglal atzmon, meaning those are the karbonis of musafin. Every yontif had musafin. Musafin meaning it's musaf, it's an add-on to the tamid. And in every yontif and Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos, we have musafin. And the musafin of all Yomim Tovim appear in Parashas Pinchas. So that's what we find in Parashas Pinchas, that's the musafin that are called boin biglal atzmon. V'halolu boin biglal lechem. The karbonis that appear in Parshas Emor are karbonis that are coming biglal lechem. You know, because in Parshas Emor, really, we don't mention the musafim of any yomtiv. In Parshas Emor, it says that you should celebrate the yomtiv v'hikraftem ishei laHashem. And it doesn't say what. And we only find out in Parshas Pinchas what. And the what is the musafim that says in Parshas Pinchas. But in Parshas, as far as Shavuos is concerned, we find already in Parshas Emor the 7 kvasim and the other karbonis, which we would think are musafin, but Rabbi Akiva says no, those are not musafin; those are boim biglal lechem. So it's a different story. It's interesting because Rashi in Parshas Emor on the pasuk vasisem seir ism. I mean, it's interesting only to those that are interested. Let me make that clear. But Rashi in Parshas Emor on the pasuk v'asisem seir izim, zokt Rashi yochol shivas kvasim v'hasoir ha'amurim kan heim shivas hakvasim v'hasoir ha'amurim b'chumash ha'pikudim kshato magia itzu porim ve'elam einam heim emor meyato elu la'atzmon elu korov b'glal lechem ve'elu musaf. So he's really repeating what Rabbi Akiva says in Menachos. However, Rashi, not only that he threw into the big the so'ir, which Rabbi Akiva doesn't discuss. Rabbi Akiva discusses the Purim ve'elim and the Kvasim, but the Soyer he doesn't discuss. Rashi throws the Soyer into the big. Not only did he throw it into the big, but the Dibur HaMaschal of the Rashi is Vasisam Seirizim, which is L'chara not what the drasha is about. So L'chara Rashi is telling us a Ravusa, a Chiddush, that not only the Par and the Ayil, which are which are different. And not only the Shiva Kvasim that Rabbi Akiva talks about, but also the Soyer that appears in Parshas Emor and the Soyer that appears in Parshas Pinchas are not the same. And this is really a special chiddush. I'll tell you why. Because the Gemara in Zvachim Davavam at Beis says, Reb Shimon Omer, Seirei Atzeres Lama Hein Boy. Why do we bring a Soyer on Shavuos? Al Tumas Mikdash V'Kadosh. It comes like always. The Soyer comes to be mechaper on Tumas Mikdash V'Kadosh. Frek the Gemara Nizrak Damoy Shel Rishon Sheni Lama Korev. How can we explain the Sa'ir of Shavuos in terms of being mechaper for Tumas Mikdash V'Kadosh like a Sa'ir every Yom Tov if we see that we bring two Sa'irim? We bring one Sa'ir that appears in Parshas Emor and another Sa'ir that appears in Parshas Pinchas. So, and for the Gemara, Al Tumas She'ira Bein Zelazeh. We bring a second Sa'ir because Tumah could have happened between this one and that one. Emor Me'ata Ru'uyim hoyu Yisrael lahakriv korbanoi b'chol eisa b'chol shor elo shechisei chakos. So, as Rashi explains, that the two seirim is one in Parshas Emor, one in Parshas Pinchas, and we bring one after the other because there might have been Tumas Mikdash V'Kadosh in between. The Gemara says that from here we find out that really Yidden should be bringing karbonos all the time. The Torah was chasa ha-Torah al memoinem shel Yisrael and wasn't mechayiv them to bring karbonos all the time. But on Shavuos, we bring two seirim one after the other, and it's mechaper on the possibility of Tumas Mikdash V'Kadosh between the two. So I'm saying, so there would avada be a makam loymar that even though we bring one set of karbonos that appears in Parshas Emor and another set of karbonos that appears in Parshas Pinchas, because we learn from the Parva Ayel to the Shiva Kvasim, but we would say that the Soyer is the same Soyer, because why should we bring two Seirim for Tumas Mikdash V'Kadosh on the same day? And that's why Rashi put the drasha on the Dibur HaMaschel V'Asisim Soyer and throws the Soyer into this bag, because he wants to tell us that even the Soyer we brought twice. Now, if you look at the Rambam in Hilchis Tmidin and Musafin, the Rambam says in Perek Ches Halacha Aleph, and listen to the Lashon HaRambam. The Rambam says, "B'yoyim chamishim misviras oim." On the 50th day of Sviras Oim, hu Chag HaShavuos, v'hu Yoim Atzeres. U'v'yoyim zeh makrivin musaf k'moi Rosh Chodesh. Shnei porim v'ayil echad, v'shiva kvasim kulam oilos u'seir chatas ve'elu korbanos amurim b'chomesh apekudim ve'hein musaf hayoyim ve'oid meviim yeser al musaf b'yoyim hazeh mincha chadosh shtei halechem u'makrivim im halechem poru shnei elim v'shiva kvasim hakol oilos u'seir chatas u'shnei kvasim zevach shlomim ve'elu hein hakorbanos amurim b'parshas vayikra b'chomesh vayikra. So the Rambam opens this halacha by saying that the Yom Chamishim Misviras Oim, who Chag HaShavuos, who Yom Atzeres. It's a very strange opening because the Rambam could have just said the Chag HaShavuos, or he could have just said B'Yom Atzeres. He could have also just said B'Yom Chamishim Misviras Oim, but that would be strange. But why did the Rambam throw in three ways to identify this day? It's the 50th day of Sviras Oim, it's Chag HaShavuos, and it's Yom Atzeres. What is this about? I mean, it's true that in Lashon Mikra, this is called only Chag HaShavuos. Chazal gave it a name, Atzeres, in the Mishnah and Shvius, Perek Beis, and Chala, and other places. But why is this important to be mentioned over here, that Chag HaShavuos is Yom Atzeres? In other words, what appears as Chag HaShavuos in the Torah is a Yom Atzeres in Divrei Chazal. I mean, why would we not know without him telling us that? So, in Parshas Mishpatim, it says, Es Chag HaMatzos Tishmor, v'goymer, L'moyed Chodesh HaAviv v'goymer, v'Chag HaKotzir, Bikurei Ma'asecho Asher Tizra Basada, which is Shavuos, v'Chag HaOsif, B'tzeis HaShona Ba'ospecho, Es Ma'asecho Min HaSada. So you see that the Moyadim are connected to the agricultural cycle Yeah, there's a Chag HaOviv, there's a Chag HaKotzer, and there's a Chag HaOsif. And so also we find that the Omer is Korev in the time of Oviv, Pesach. And it's Matir the Chodosh Lehedith. The Shtei Alechem that are Korev in the Chag HaKotzer on Shavuos are Matir the Chodosh LeMikdosh. As Rashi says, Bikurei Ma'asecha. Why do we refer to Shavuos as Bikurei Ma'asecha? Shuzman Havas Bikurim. The Shtei Alechem Aboim Ba'atzeres Hayu Matir Mesa Chodosh LeMenochis Ulahavi HaBikurim LeMikdosh Shenema V'yem Bikurim. And in this context, we have the mitzvah of Tzviras Omer. Svartem lachem mimochres haShabbos miyoim haviachem es Omer hatnufa, which is in the Chag HaOviv, which is Matir the Chodosh Lehedyet, ad Sheva Shabbos, etc. Ad mimochres haShabbos haShvius tispru chamishim yoim v'yikraftem mincha chadosh al Hashem, which is what we do in the Chag HaKotzer on Shavuos, which is Matir the Chodosh to Mikdosh. Uboifen that the name Chag HaShavuos, which is based on the counting of the Shiva Shavuos, is connected with the Chag HaKotzer, which is on this day, that comes from the Moed Chodesh HaOviv. That's the essence of Chag HaShavuos. Chag HaShavuos is a celebration of the Shavuos between the Chag HaOviv and the Chag HaKotzer. Okay, and this is the Mechayev. This is the Mechayev of the Shtei Alechem, because the Shtei Alechem is to be Matir the Chodosh LeMikdosh, just like the Omer is Matir the Chodosh Tehedj. But why did Chazal come and invent a new name for this Yom Tov? Atzeres. So there's a fascinating Sforno in Parshas Emor, who says, he writes this on the pasuk by Yom Hashmini Atzeres. He says, Inyan ha'atzira, hu loi bilvad lishbois mimeloches hedyet, aval hi imze azhoras amida ezes man b'mkoimois hakodesh. It doesn't just mean atzeres in a sense of holding back from doing melacha. It also has the meaning of a get-together, to get together in the mikdash. In the mikdash, but not only in the mikdash. B'mkoimois hakodesh, la'avoid b'mkoimois hahemes hakel yizbarech b'toira oy b'tfila oy ba'avoida. And how do I know that the atzeres has a meaning of getting together? Ke'inyan shenemar in Shmuel v'shom ishmei avdei Shaul b'yom hahu ne'etzar lefnei Hashem v'hu amoroi katshu tzoin kiru atzara, which means to call an assembly. While Derech brings other psukim. Now, so he says that the meaning of atzeres in the Torah is to hold back from malacha and to get together. Now he says, ubehiyois shebiyoim shvi shel Pesach ne'etzru Yisrael im Moshe Yachdov l'shoire lokel Yisbarach. Since on Shvi shel Pesach Yidden got together with Moshe Rabbeinu to say the Shiras Hayam, kidesh oisei hayoim liyos atzeres l'Hashem. It's interesting because, in other words, we celebrate Shvi shel Pesach. It's not a celebration of Kriyas Yamsov. It's a celebration of the Shiras Hayam that we said by Kriyas Yamsov. We make an Atzeres to commemorate the Atzeres that Moshe Rabbeinu made with Bnei Yisrael when they sang the Shira. Now he says, "Ubehiyois shahoyo yoim hachamishim liyitzias Mitzrayim yoim matan Torah asher boy ne'etzru Yisrael yachdov la'avodas hakel Yisbarach." The 50th day of the Svira was the day when Yidden got together to receive the Torah. That's why Chazal referred to Shavuos as Atzeres, because it's a commemoration of that get-together, the original get-together of Matan Torah. He says, Omnam bat Torah lo yuzkar oisei hayoim b'zeh Hashem klal. The Torah doesn't refer to it as Atzeres. And he says, why? V'zeh mipnei shekilkelu Yisrael as hamusag ba'atzirosa. Because Klal Yisrael did the egel, and therefore they lost what they accomplished with this get-together. Vayisnatzlu es edyom mehar chorev. So he's saying that Chazal went and gave it the name Atzeres to commemorate that original Atzeres, but the Torah actually omitted the term Atzeres. because we lost what we gained with that Atzeres. Yeah, we need to understand how come Chazal brought back the name Atzeres if we lost it, as we hopefully will be able to explain later. But now, what I want to say is like this: the Shtei Alechem that are connected with the Korban HaOmer and the Shaykh to the Moyadim of the agricultural cycle of Aviv and Kotzir, the Shtei Alechem has no shaykhs with the fact that this day is the day of Matan Torah. Whereas the Musafin of Chovas Hayoim that appear in Parshas Bamidbar, those Musafin are shaykh to the general Kedushas Hayoim of this day. And Chazal Megalatos that this day also represents the day of Matan Torah. So therefore, when the Rambam is coming to be mechalek between the karbonis that come beglal halechem and the karbonis of Musafei Hayoim, the Rambam is magdim and he says, "B'yom chamishim yisviras oimer hu chag haShavuos v'hu yom atzeres." That this day wears two hats. This day has two identities. It's also chag haShavuos and it's also yom atzeres. And why is this important to be mentioned now? Because the Rambam is going to teach us that there are two sets of karbonis, and the two sets of karbonis, one is Musafei Hayoim and one is Biglal HaLechem. So the karbonis of Biglal HaLechem that appear in Parshas Emor, those karbonis are connected only with the fact that this is the day of Chag HaShavuos, which is the weeks of counting from the Omer to the Shtei Alechem, which is based on the agricultural cycle, which is one dimension of this Yom Tov. But then we have another set of karbonis that appears in Parshas Pinchas. That set of karbonis is geboit on the Klolius Kedushas Hayoim of Atzeres, which means it's the Zman, also that it's the Zman Matan Torah Seinu, and therefore we bring the second set of karbonis Mitzav Chag HaShavuos. Now, we can understand that the Yerushalmi said about the pasuk of Soyer L'chaper in Parshas Pinchas that B'chol HaKorbonos Ksiv Chet and Ba'atzeres ain't Ksiv Chet, because Amar Lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, Amar Lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, Mikim Shekibaltem Ol Torah Mal Ani Aleichem Kilu Loichatasem Yimeichem. So yes, what do you mean? It's true that in Parshas Pinchas it doesn't say Soyer L'chatos, but in Parshas Emor it says Soyer L'chatos. But the teretz is because in Parshas Emor, we're not talking about Shavuos as the Zman Matan Torah. In Parshas Emor, we're talking about the karbonos that are coming Biglal HaLechem. And when we're talking about the karbonos that are coming Biglal HaLechem, we're talking about the Chag HaShavuos, which is based on the agricultural cycle, and therefore it's not about Matan Torah, and therefore Taka says So'ir Lechatos. But in Parshas Pinchas, when we're talking about the Musafei Hayoim that come mitzad it being this man Matan Torah Seinu, over there it doesn't say lechatos because Kivin shekibaltem aleichem oil Torah mal ani aleichem ki'ilu loichatosem miyameichem. And if you look, the Emes in the Targum Uncle is on in Parshas Pinchas on Ubiyom Bikurim Bakrivchem Mincha Chadosh El Hashem B'Shvuos Seichem Mikra Kodesh. He teaches B'Shvuos Seichem Ba'atzar Teichoin, which is the Lashon Atzeres, which Chazal use. But, and that's not like he translates Shavuos, weeks, in other places. Because the pshat is that over here, in Parshas Pinchas, the karbonis are shaykh to the dimension of Atzeres, the dimension of Matan Torah Seinu. Now, in most Sidurei HaTfilah, most popular Sidurei HaTfilah, or Machzorim, in the Tfilas Musaf of Shavuos, we say, Umin Chosam v'niskayim kimedubar, etc. V'so'ir lechatos. L'chara, what do you mean v'so'ir lechatos? We brought two se'irim on Shavuos. So Be'emes in the Siddur of the Balatanya, it says Ushnei se'irim lechaper. And there's some ancient nuschos that have that nusach, Shnei se'irim lechatos. Darf man doch verstehen, what's the shaila if we should say in Musaf so'ir or Shnei se'irim? So the Emes in the Dazekeinim Ibalei HaTosus in Parshas Pinchas, Chof Ches Lamed, it says like this: V'yesh makshim lama ein oimrim betfilas musaf shel Shavuos k'moi kain u'shnei seirim, like we say on Rosh Hashanah. Shahari bezvachim masik. Shnei seiri atzeres lama ein boim al tuma she'ira bein zelazeh. V'chein lechichim apsuchim b'parshas Emor. And Rashi says, Yochel soher omer kan, who's soher omer b'chumash apikudim. And it's not. It's a different soher. If it came me'acha she'krevim shnei seirim, v'kaparosom shovo, l'chaper al tumas mikdash v'kadoshov, k'sha'ar seirei hamusafim, din la'azkiram b'tfilah. Why are we not mentioning both? V'yashlemet aloydom. Shahari tfilas musaf tachas korban musaf ibo. Ve'echad min ha'seirim alolu, lo hoyo korev b'musaf, ki im b'shachar. The Chaim Perish Nami Rashi beParshas Emor Elu la'atzmon ve'elu la'atzmon Halolu Kreven beglal alechem halolu musaf. Now it's interesting that the Balei HaTosfos, they didn't ask why we don't mention 14 kvasim. Vice the choice that they lechatchil understood that the korbanos that are coming beglal halechem have no place to be mentioned in Tfilas Musaf because it's not a korban musaf, it's korbanos haboim beglal halechem. So why was he bothered with the so'ir? Why we don't mention the so'ir of Parshas Emor? So it's be'emes mavur mil shoynoi, because the way he asks the question, that since it's mavur in the Gemara and Zvachim, that both seirim come for the same reason. It's kaparos on shova, and they're both mechaper on tumas mikdash v'kadoshov. Yeah. Therefore, I'm bothered. Why are we not mentioning the so'ir of Parshas Emor also? Why? Oh, so to that he gives a teretz that the reason that we're not mentioning it, even though it's the same as the other soir, is because it was brought at a different time. It wasn't brought in the Zman Musaf, it was brought in the Zman Shachris. Okay, but he brings from Rashi, because Rashi said Halolu Latzman, it's not clear what they mean, because Rashi is talking about that these two sets of karbonos. He's not saying when they're brought. I mean, it doesn't say in Rashi that they're not brought during the time of Musaf. The emes is that in the Rambam, it's mashma that they were korev after the Musaf, not shachris, because the Rambam says v'oid mevi'in yeser al Musaf hazeh b'yom zeh. L'chorei mitzad the klal of toder v'sheinoi toder, we should bring first the musafin and then the korbanos haboim beglal halechem that come only once a year. Be'emes the Malbim in Parshas Emor, the way he reads the Teres Koyanim, it comes out clear that the so'ir that's part of the korban, all the korbanos that came beglal halechem were brought after the musaf, not b'shachris. But Akopanim, what I'm saying is that the nusach of the Baal HaTanya, Shnei Seirim, has a shorish in this Tosfos, because since Tosfos is saying that the only reason that we don't mention the so'ir of Parshas Emor is because it was korev b'shachar. So if we say that it wasn't korev b'shachar, like it's mashma in the Rambam and like the Malbim holds, and that it was korev after the musafin, then Tosfos Kasha comes back that we should mention the Shnei Seirim, and that's how Itaka has it, that we mention the two Seirim. Now, to make it very short, I just want to say that the fact that the Sforno says that we lost the Madrega of Atzeres, that's why the Torah omits the term Atzeres, but Chazal call it Atzeres. I mean, what's the pshat? If the Torah omits it, why do Chazal call it? But the pshat is that in Torah Shebal Peh, it's really the as we know that with Shviras Haluchis, we got the Luchas Shnias. And the Mogen Avroam in the Zayis Ranon in the end of Yehoshua, in his Agois to the Yalkut Shimoni, and the Beis Halevi in his Droshes, both say, based on the Yerushalmi in Shkolim Perik Vov, that if we would have been left with the Luchos Rishonos, we would have had all of Torah B'chsav. And the whole institution of Torah Shebal Peh is a consequence of Shviras Haluchis, and in the Mahalach of Luchos Shnias, we have only what we have in Torah Shebechsav, and the rest is Bal Peh. It's also mevur that this Mahalach of Torah Shebal Peh is really a Mahalach that allows us to come back to the original Madrega of Luchos Rishonis. In other words, through the toil of Torah Shebal Peh, where we have to work on our own to reveal the Dvar Hashem, that allows us to get rid of the Chet HaEgel and bring us back to the Madrega of Luchos Rishonis. As it's Mavur Be'emes in the Rambam, that even Bizman Hazeh, somebody that's Mekabel Olav Oil Torah, the Rambam says Hasmodas Hakriya. So about him, the Mishnah says the Rambam, Kol HaMekabel Olav Oil Torah Ma'avir Mimenu Oil Malchus V'Oil Derech Eretz. And that's Mustama, the Yesoid of what the Rambam says in the end of Hilchos Shmita V'Yovel, that Lo Shevet Levi Bilvad, but anybody that's not Varuchoi Oisoi Ve'Hevinei Madoi Lamoi L'Fnei Hashem L'Shorsoi Lo'Yovdoi, he takes on the Madrega of Shevet Levi and Hashem Chelkoi V'Nachlosei. The Madrega of Shevet Levi is the Madrega, he wasn't Chayte in the Chayte Eidel. And therefore, he held on to the Madrega of Poskazu Hamoson, and he's outside of the Gzeira of Bezei Asapecha Toichal Lechem. And everybody that's Mekabel all of Oil Hasmodas Akriya is able to come back to that Madrega of Poskazu Hamoson, the Madrega of Luchos Rishonis, and therefore, Mavirin Mimenu Oil Malchus Oil Derech Eretz. Umemela Kumtois, that in Torah Shebal Peh, the Madrega of Atzeres is not lost. Torah Shebiksav doesn't mention it because on the surface, in the real world, we lost that Madrega of Luchos Rishonis. And therefore, it's not mentioned because they kilkalu es hamusad, like the Sforno says, visnatzlu es edyon. But in Torah Shebal Peh, we restore the Atzeres of Shavuos. And therefore, in Torah Shebal Peh, we call Shavuos Atzeres. Okay, Rabbi Sai, I wish you all a good Shabbos and a freilichen Yom Tov.